What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 99 of Week in Review. My name is Sean, and on this week's episode, we're going to take a look at the first 3 episodes of Life is Strange 2, and that includes The Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit, which is the kind of like prelude, prequel episode to it. So we'll look at that and the first 2 episodes of the series. I'll tell you about streams happening over on twitch.tv/SeanosaurusRex, and I'll tell you about this week's new releases. And I thought that The Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit was an excellent way to start this game. I liked Chris as a character. I thought he was a really well-written, child when he was, playing with his toys and coming up with the adventures for Captain Spirit. It felt right. It reminded me of when I was a young kid and I was, playing with action figures and creating those stories. It felt very authentic and felt very real. And I thought that the Captain Spirit character was great in itself. The Captain Spirit character is the main focal point of the episode. Your main goal is to find the pieces to create your costume. You have to find 3 separate items, and each of those has a little bit of a puzzle associated with it. And what I liked so much about this episode was the environmental storytelling and the way you discover the backstory of Chris and his terrible, horrible, no good, very bad piece of shit, drunk, angry, garbage-ass, garbage father, who we'll talk about in a minute. You walk around and you read articles about stuff and you learn what happened to Chris's mom and why his dad is the way he is. It was a worry there for a little bit because I was afraid that they were going to kind of go down this path of this guy doesn't really want to be a dad, and over the course of the next 5 episodes, he's going to learn that he loves being a dad, and it's that is a garbage bullshit story, and I don't think it really is going to resonate with me. But the way you walk around and the way you explore the area, I thought was really interesting. I thought the kind of the overarching stuff, especially with Chris and the story with the mom, was very effective emotionally. It's a cool, just open area. You walk around, you have your main objective, which is to get your costume together, and then you have to, wake your dad up from his drunken nap, because he watches a basketball game and apparently can't do that without alcohol because he's, again, a piece of shit. But as you're walking around, you have, your main objective, which I've said, 7 times now. But you have several other things that you can do as well. You can defeat a certain supervillain that's a snowman. You can go out and look for a buried treasure thing that he has made. You can go up to a tree house and do that sort of thing. And it's really interesting. I like the way it worked. I thought it was a cool introduction into this world, into the story and what they want to tell. I don't know. I liked where they were going with it initially. I thought it was cool the way it ended, and it's just, I don't know. I thought it was a really well done piece of content that was free and really got me interested in playing Life is Strange 2, the full complete game. Going back to the Captain Spirit thing for just a quick second, I like the way that real world stuff was pulled in from Chris. The villain is a specific thing related to what happened to his mother. It's Mantroid, and I was that's a really weird name. Okay, whatever. I kind of just chalked it up to kids' creation. But when they make the reveal and they show you, how this goes, how Chris got from point A to point B with this, I was oh shit, that's really awesome, and I liked the way that was integrated. Again, I thought it was a terrific start to it. I thought the environmental storytelling was very interesting. I thought it was emotionally resonant as far as Chris and his mom. His dad is unbearably awful, and I can't overstate how terrible he is. He sucks on every level. And I was a little bit worried moving on from there. But it's a great starting point for the series moving forward. But instead of playing as Chris and Captain Spirit, we're actually introduced to our new character, Sean Diaz, who is going to be our protagonist from this point on in episode 1. And I really enjoyed this episode all the way up to the inciting incident. From there, it kind of meanders around for a little while, with sequences ranging from pretty dull to actually quite interesting, but it never really hits a steady flow. But let's start from the beginning. I really liked Sean's relationship with his dad. Sean and Daniel's relationship. Daniel is his little brother with his dad. It felt really good, and I liked the interaction between them. The first time you actually talk to your dad, you have to be a judge presiding over who gets a chocolate bar, and that's just a silly and fun, goofy way to get you introduced into this family and kind of his parenting style. Like, he's a single parent, he's doing the best he can. He's not like, there's a sequence in the game when something gets knocked over and the brothers are fighting, and they're fighting in like a very like brotherly way, and he's not mad. Like, he's frustrated and he's annoyed, but he's not yelling and screaming at anybody. He's just like, please, like, just stop for like 30 seconds. Could you not do this? I need to go do this other thing. I need to work on this car. That's what I want to do. You have an interesting conversation with him down in the garage. It just did a really great job of setting up like why I should care about this family, why I should care about this dynamic, why I should care about these characters, and I was interested to learn more until all hell breaks loose. Thanks to the little brother Daniel, who went outside and then accidentally got fake blood on someone. You get into a bit of a scuffle with the next door neighbor, whose head lands on a very unhelpfully placed rock. The cops show up, they get down on the ground, the dad comes out to try to de-escalate the situation. The cop fires off his gun, kills the dad, and then a like explosion goes off, but not like an explosion, like an energetic explosion like you would see in like a comic book movie or something like that. And from there we follow Sean and Daniel as they go on the run, because the cop that killed their dad, he is dead, and the cop cars are flipped over. All hell's broken loose. It's crazy things are happening, so they just run for it. From here is where the game gets a little bit rocky. They go to a national forest, which isn't a particularly interesting sequence. After spending the night in the national forest, the characters then work their way down to a gas station. And what I like so much about this sequence was it did kind of what the early game stuff did, where it lulled you into a false sense of security. There's a turn on something, in this case a very racist cop who figures out that they're on the run, and then proceeds to be very rude to us and call us a racial slur, and then tie Sean up in the back room. But it lulls you into that false sense of security, and then goes in a very different and darker direction than I was anticipating them going with it. And I thought it was really interesting, and it was a level of intensity that they hadn't hit just yet, where you're stuck in this back room and you like desperately need to get out because good God knows what the hell this guy is willing to do. He's already physically assaulted you at this point. He's called you a racial slur. There doesn't really seem to be much of a limit with what this person will do to a person that he feels is strong, or he is stronger than, if that makes sense. It's a really intense sequence that I thought, like, in such like the snap of a finger, just shit just went sideways, and so it kept me on my toes a little bit more. Before this all happened, though, we are actually introduced to a character named Brody at this gas station, and we meet him under some odd circumstances. He's writing about how people just live nakedly, which is a little bit of a weird thing to be writing about at a local gas station, but hey, you know, you do you, because he's a like traveling blogger, which is kind of a weird profession to have, but hey, no judgment here. What I like so much about Brody is that he was very helpful to Sean, both from a like financial standpoint and like a physical world standpoint. That sounds like a really dumb way to say that, but whatever. But he also helps from an emotional standpoint of actually bothering to listen. And this is the first time Sean bothers to tell anybody about what's going on. It's really the only opportunity he's had. He's had some like text message conversations that you can kind of look through, but he hasn't revealed too much about what's going on. But he really confides in Brody. And the best part about that is Brody never turns. And that's what I was worried about. I was worried that Brody was going to appear nice initially, but then turn at the last second. Brody's final deeds of goodness to Sean and Daniel are to give Sean a new backpack that he can use while they're out and about on the run, and he sets them up with a hotel room for the night to help them get some rest before they continue on to their journey. This is also where we figure out that Sean wants to work his way down to Puerto Lobos, which is a place that his dad had mentioned earlier in the game as a place that he wanted to return to once he had enough money and like could retire down there. What I didn't really get initially was that he actually saw that as like his final plan, but the way it was explained didn't translate to me, where I was sitting there going like, okay, Puerto Lobos feels like here's the best case scenario, hopeful, like dream-like thing that the writers threw in there to be like, okay, here's like kind of just a general goal, but we're not going to make you too attached to it, because if something else comes up later in the series, we want you to be able to let that idea go pretty easily. I never felt like that was the main point of the game. During the drive down to the hotel before Brody parts ways with Sean and Daniel, they stop and have a conversation outside of Arcadia Bay, and Brody really stresses the point of telling Daniel what happened. Their dad is dead. Sean's been kind of lying to him, being like, he doesn't know exactly how to break the news to him. I guess kind of lying is a nice way of saying he was just lying to Daniel about what exactly was going on. This is where my biggest frustration of the game comes. I was ready to tell Daniel and let him know what's going on. The game has other ideas in that it keeps giving you other things that you need to do before you can tell him, and the game prolongs this to the point where Daniel sees it on the television at the hotel, and that's when we figured out that he has superpowers. What is baffling to me is that Sean never puts together that the superpowers that are causing the problems in the hotel room are what killed the cop outside their house. He never puts that together, and it's like, it's so easy for us, the audience, to piece together that he should be able to do that as well. And it's a really weird scenario where I felt like he should have had that connection point. After the hotel stay, we see Sean and Daniel on a charter bus working their way south. Not really sure exactly where they're going. Puerto Lobos has been mentioned, but I'm not super convinced that that's exactly where they're going. It's an interesting start to the series. Looking back at that first episode, it doesn't actually feel like a whole lot happens. There are a couple key moments here and there that really work to kind of further the plot, but it also just feels very stagnant, and the section in the forest is very empty. There's a large chunk at the end that feels pretty empty, minus the reveal of Daniel's powers, which I get is a big deal, but there's a lot of kind of just fluff there to extend the runtime. I think if you cut it down a little bit, if you just take that forest section and get it out of there, you knock it down, it feels a little bit tighter, it feels a little bit better. The change of characters was very surprising, but I quickly started to like them, and I liked their dynamic with their dad, and I was excited to see where that was going. I do wonder if that section needed to be a little bit longer to really establish that, because while I was bummed that he was gone, I also was like, I've only spent like an hour with this dynamic. I don't really have that much of a connection to him. So maybe it needed like an extra day or two at the beginning, not in real time, in game time, to establish that and make me really care, so that when shit does hit the fan, it's just like, what the fuck is happening? Oh god, this sucks so much. It is a good setup episode that is a little bit drugged down by some fluff and an unclear goal moving forward. I actually found episode 2 to be a step down from episode 1, and I thought it meandered around for a really long time before hitting a suspenseful conclusion. And I put suspenseful in air quotes because boy do they do everything in their power to suck any level of intensity or suspense out of it. Episode 2 jumps us about a month ahead, and Daniel is becoming a little more confident with his powers. We start with them training out in the snowy forest. They found a little getaway cottage that has been abandoned that they've been living in, but there's just one problem. Daniel has a really bad cough, and he's had a really bad cough for a couple of weeks, according to the game. This is kind of our issue that we need to take care of, and it forces Daniel and Sean to move on from where they were. Fortunately, they know someone that should be able to help them in Beaver Creek, but before they leave, Sean establishes rules that basically boil down to hey, you can't use your powers because we're on the run. If you use your powers, it could draw attention to us, could cause us problems. Apparently these things fall on deaf ears because Daniel does not give a fuck about what you have to say. His comfort level actually gets to the point where it costs him dearly. He's so used to not dealing with anything that he uses his powers to let the dog out, and the dog pays the ultimate price. They got a dog in episode 1. This is where my frustration with Daniel really started to escalate. Sure, he's been annoying in the past, but it's very little kid annoying, where, and again, we have that well-written kid of I believe it, I understand why you're being this way, because you're the little brother and You're acting in a way that like a little brother does, or a kid that is 9 years old would act. He just never seems to put together that he's not being careful with what he's doing, from like not only like an attention grabbing way, but even like in the way of, if you're going to take the dog out, you need to take the dog out. Don't just open a door and just hope that things are going to be okay, because they might not go the way you want them to. Once we work our way to Beaver Creek, this is where everything started to click into place of exactly how the first episode really ties into this whole thing. When I played the first episode, which is set in Beaver Creek, I thought that Chris himself was going to have some sort of powers, and that's what we were going to work with. What I didn't put together was that Sean and Daniel are the two characters that are shown at the very last, in the very last bit of the episode. And it's actually Daniel, and this makes me feel kind of dumb, but it's Daniel that prevents him from falling. So instead of it being like, oh, there's going to be multiple people with different powers going on, it's just one person who saved a kid. All that stuff kind of ties in. I feel like the reveal of who answers the door is supposed to be more of a surprise than it is, because it doesn't make sense for it to be anyone but who answers the door. And it's your grandparents on your mother's side. Sean very briefly and very loosely explains what happened, and the grandparents take the kids in. They're going to watch them, but they have to work under all these rules. We know how rules are going to go with Daniel, but you have to, like, no phone, no internet, that sort of thing. We got to maintain a low profile because, we're hiding out in a different state at this point. After the initial night that happens in the house, we fast forward, I believe it's a week, and Daniel's cough is magically gone, which is a point of frustration for me, where this is one event that didn't necessarily need to happen and didn't really have like any sort of like lead up to it. Like, it's a thing that felt like it needed to happen to push us into Beaver Creek, to pull Chris and Captain Spirit and his dad into the story, for us to interact in that way, in like this completely unnecessary kind of forced way of including this sort of stuff, and it just doesn't feel cohesive in a way. It feels like an unnecessary distraction. Also, the characters have a bunch of cans of ravioli, but Sean never thought to go buy medicine for this cough. I don't understand that thought process all that much. I also didn't really believe that the grandparents wanted to help. Like, they seemed very reluctant to help. Like, they wanted to because they were family, but they also didn't because there's huge implications of what could happen with them. Getting to the grandparents' house also increased my frustration with Daniel, and for as annoying as he was in the opening segment, after the time lapse happens, he becomes hyper obsessed with learning more information about his mother, and all of that is thanks to a locked door. Additionally, after the time jump, Daniel and Chris meet, they become fast friends, and Daniel starts to use his powers more and more consistently in ways that he shouldn't. Like, he's deliberately lying to Chris because Chris thinks he has superpowers, but it's just Daniel who saved him from falling off the ladder. Daniel's the one who's making all these toys move around. It's the thing where, like, you tell Daniel, like, you can't do this. We are on the run. We're going to get caught. What about this are you just not getting? And to make matters worse, now you're lying to a kid about their potential powers that they don't actually have. On a Sunday morning, Sean is a chronic oversleeper. He wakes up late. The grandparents have gone to church. Daniel is over at the neighbor's house using his powers, and you need to go over there and go with them. On this particular day, Chris and his dad are going to go to the market and go get a Christmas tree. Cool, great. For some reason, the game makes you tag along, and this is another one of those things where the game makes you do something that you don't really want to do or need to do, but because the game needs to push the plot forward, it kind of forces you down this specific path. You go down there, you meet a couple of new characters in Cassidy and Finn. I almost forgot her name. Finn, who is voice acted very poorly in this. All of his lines are delivered very flatly. He's also a very annoying character. I didn't really like him. I thought Cassidy was a little more interesting. She's just playing guitar. They explain that they are train hopping across the Pacific Northwest in the United States, whatever. And they're just free living their lives. And that is kind of your setup for your exit out of this episode. Everything seems fine. When you get out of the truck initially at the market, you have a conversation with Daniel where you say, hey, Knock it the fuck off and stop telling Chris that he has superpowers when he doesn't. Just stop. Don't do that anymore. This falls on deaf ears. Everything seems all hunky-dory. They go get the Christmas tree. You have a conversation with Chris's dad in the truck, which is the first example of the game using a conversation to take a very long time when you just need to get out of the car and go in the house. Like, you have something else that is at the forefront that you're like, okay, I've already gone to the market. I shouldn't have gone to the market. I just want to get in the house and like not have a conflict with my grandparents who might throw me out, and then what am I supposed to do? When you get in the house, you discover that grandma and grandpa are still gone, and Daniel becomes so laser focused on getting inside this locked door to learn more about his mom. And no matter how many times I said, no, like, I'm not going to worry about it, it's not that big of a deal, I was pointing Sean down a path that was a little more like, it's been X number of years. She's moved on. I've accepted this. You may not have, but I'm not going to help you break into this room. Like, I'm not going to do it. The game doesn't give a shit what you say. You're going into that room and you need to progress the plot in a specific way. That's really frustrating. I never wanted to go in the room, and you made me go in the room. I didn't care that much about Karen. I didn't really want to learn more information about her. I felt like I had other things that I was focused on of like, am I going to be able to survive here for much longer? Did the stuff at the market, like, how did that go off so smoothly? Something just felt off about it. When you go in the room, you search around, you end up finding a letter. Basically what happens is that the mother, Karen, had sent the letter to her grandparents with a P.O. box return address that basically asked, like, hey, I've seen the news. Will you please take care of them if they show up? We show up, they take care of them, which is why everything felt a little bit off. This is where the game gets incredibly frustrating to me. You're having a conversation upstairs with your grandma. Something falls on your grandpa right as the sheriffs show up. So you need to go downstairs, try and help lift this big giant cabinet off of him. And all the while this is happening, sheriff officers are knocking on the door. This is supposed to be a very intense sequence, I feel. I feel like the developers and the people working on this game really wanted you to feel this like tear of like, I have to get out, but I also need to help my grandpa get this thing off of his leg. I can use Daniel's powers to lift it off, no big deal. The conversation takes forever. In the same way that, like, when a hero character gets, like, mortally wounded and they have, like, 14 minutes of a speech before they kick the bucket and finally die, this is how that sequence feels when it's like, this should not be happening for this amount of time. Like, I feel like the sheriffs would have broken the door down and come in regardless of what the hell is going on in here. We should be caught, no problem. It zaps every ounce of intensity out. And you finally get done with this conversation. You run out the back. You do this whole thing. Oh, turns out Daniel didn't stop lying to Chris. So obviously the answer for Chris is, I think I have superpowers. Hang on a second. Let me jump in front of a moving cop car. So thanks, Daniel. Thanks for not fucking listening again. Why are you such a pain in the ass? Ugh, damn it, Daniel. It makes me not even want to give you the Christmas present I bought you at the market. Episode 2 is a big step down from episode 1. It meanders around for a while, forces you down a couple of paths that I didn't really want to go down just to progress the story. It felt like it went out of its own way to go out of the way that it didn't need to go. It's a frustrating episode to look back on. I really became frustrated with Daniel in his flippant use of his powers, tricking poor Chris into thinking he had superpowers, which nearly got him killed, and a scene that takes way too long to figure out what it's trying to do. It's not great, and that's a bummer because I really questioned whether or not I wanted to continue this game after episode number 2. Through the first half of Life is Strange 2, I feel very mixed on it. I thought it started strong with Captain Spirit, and I liked the opening section of episode 1. It kind of meanders around there for a little bit, has a couple interesting things that happen, but it still has that frustrating aspect of making you do something when you're just trying to do something else. Like, I just wanted to tell Daniel what was going on, but the game's like, no, please do these other 4 things. Before you do that elongates the amount of time and increases the chance that he sees something that I'm not ready to share with him just yet. And that's exactly what happens. The superpower aspect is interesting, but it's becoming a frustration very quickly because in episode 2, which I think is a little bit of a step back, that episode meanders around a lot. It forces you down plot points that I wasn't super interested in following. Daniel becomes much more of a pain in my butt with his flippant use of powers and just not listening to anything at all ever, and it's really annoying. It also has the egregious mistake of having a conversation that takes entirely too long to play out in a situation that feels like it should have ended a lot sooner than that. There is no shred of suspense or intensity or anything for as long as that goes on. It is evaporated like just at the snap of a finger, where it's like this conversation is taking forever. I don't believe this setup in this scenario. Also, why do you keep lying to Chris? Because I told you to stop, and you almost cost him, man. He went flying out in front of that sheriff's car. What are you doing? But through the first 3 episodes, I feel very on it. Finally, on this week's show, we'll look at this week's new releases. There's nothing on Blu-ray. Black Christmas is in theaters, along with Seabrig, A Hidden Life, and Uncut Gems. Those last 3 I mentioned are in very limited release. And then on the game side, we have Blacksad Under the Skin, which is a detective game based on a comic book, as is Stone, which is a game where you solve a mystery playing as a koala bear. And then you have Blacksad, which is a game where you play as a cat as a detective. So it's a very detective heavy games week this week. As for the streams this week, over on twitch.tv/ShaunosaurusRex, I won't be streaming on Wednesday, but on Friday I'll be starting out Blacksad Under the Skin. I'm looking forward to it. I really like detective style games. Like, I really loved LA Noire. I'm hoping that this is kind of in that vein. I don't really know a whole lot about it. Kind of a weird game because it accidentally released way too early on one of the consoles. It's not supposed to launch until this week, but it launched about a month ago, but it was very incomplete, and people bought it and were like, well, it doesn't run very well, and the developers had to scramble and be like, don't download the damn game. There's a day 1 patch that's going to fix a lot of these issues. So it's getting an official release this week, and I'll be playing it on Friday and Saturday, and then depending on how long it is, I'll be checking it out on Sunday as well. Thank you so much for watching this week's episode of Week in Review. If you like the content, you can scroll on down and you can hit subscribe. You're going to want to hit subscribe so you can find out what happens next week and how I feel about the second half of Life is Strange 2. Be sure to check out the streams over on twitch.tv/ShaunosaurusRex on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and be sure to check back every Tuesday for more Week in Review. We'll see you next week.